Everyone. This is the Real Estate Investing War Room, where we talk about real life stories about what's happening in the world of real estate, and we keep it real as we can. Anyway, so today we're going to go over asset management from the trenches. So what that means is that there's just a lot of stories that happen when we're doing real estate. It's some of it's portrayed on that HGTV show pretty well about how they can come over with a couple of problems along the way when they're renovating properties. But in real life, a lot of these situations happen all the time. So I want to share with you guys what we're seeing. Now, I'll do this on a frequent update. Probably once a month is a good time frame for me to share with you what happened in the last month. But I'll tell you, I haven't done one of these yet. And so we've got, my whole career to go over. So good, couple of years worth of material here. So what I've been doing most recently, I think most of the stories happen over at our Canyon Lake short-term rental property for a couple of reasons. I mean, the first one is it's short-term rental hospitality. And so when you have guests coming in and out every day, you're just dealing with a lot more people. And so you have a lot more interactions with strangers where things could go extremely well or extremely bad. And on top of that, that's probably our biggest, heaviest lift where we turned the whole property from essentially a mobile home park into this boutique hotel short-term rental community. And there was a large amount of construction and repositioning that had to happen around that. So I'll share some of the stories from that property and just the other ones that we've been working on as well. So in November, we were having, well, I guess over October and November, we had an on-site person start working at our property so that we could give a better experience to the guests as they were checking in. We At that point we had renovated about 7 of the 13 cabins fully, and we were having more and more guests coming and checking in that had little needs for, hey, the Wi-Fi is not working, or my AC is not getting as cold as it's supposed to, or whatever little things that it would help to have somebody on site to be able to go over there and fix whatever the problem is right away. Well, as it turned out, there were guests that would feed local cats. And so more and more often we would see these cats congregate at our property. And so the on-site team that was there was a little nervous that the guests would be bothering, or that the cats would be bothering the guests. And so they took it upon themselves to go down to the, Dollar General over there and buy a little bit of cat food and set out some bowls for the cats in just kind of a common area that was a little out of the way, so that the guests wouldn't be disturbed by cats, basically looking for food. They would even go scratch on the door and, walk into the cabins that these guys are staying in, kind of be harassing the guests. So most of the guests were saying, hey, this is, not a big deal, but obviously, it's a nuisance, and we wanted to make the best experience that we could. So we were trying to figure out, well, what's the best thing to do? So we called animal control and asked them, hey, it ended up being 9 different cats that were on the property in the afternoons around 5 or 6 o'clock. They knew to congregate in that same common area. So they were all, out there, and if they weren't fed, they had a lot of energy to go off and find food. So we called the animal control and we said, hey, what do you guys recommend that we do about a situation like this where we have these cats coming out here? Can you guys just come and bring a box and a net and catch them all and then take them all with you guys? And animal control said that they don't actually do that. What they recommended was the appropriate thing was that we go off and we buy cages to catch the cats. We leave them, at the front of our property, and we give the animal control a call, and they will actually come over to us, pick the cats up, take them to, the Humane Society, I suppose, or somewhere, and then spay and neuter the cats so they won't get pregnant. And then they will come back to our address, to our property, and drop them back off. And granted, spaying and neutering wild feral cats is a good idea, and we do want them to not get pregnant so they're not spreading this around even more. But it doesn't solve our immediate problem of, well, the cats are still here, they're still hungry, they're still going to be bothering the guests. So we asked them, can you put them up for adoption, or what's really a better protocol than just dropping them back off with us? And they said they can't do that. We called the Humane Society too. They said they were full. They couldn't take any more wild cats. I guess they just have so many coming in right now that they don't have any more room for any new ones. And they didn't have any other options. So, we talked to our partners about what's the best way to handle this. And essentially what we came up with was to go, got some traps, and these were pretty friendly cats. They would they'd walk up to us because they knew we were feeding them. But we got, some carrying crates and a couple of traps. And so we would, gather the cats, out of the nine. We actually ended up keeping one of them, to help find some of the mice and rodents and insects that were wandering around the property. But the other eight, we actually put them in these carrying cases. And then I would drive them down the road about 30, 40 minutes to another city. And we would put them in a neighborhood where there would be potential for food or potential for a good, better life, but then just away from our guests. And we really did reach out to, all the authorities that we could, and they didn't have any solution to doing this. And we felt like, hey, this is the most humane thing that we could do is just relocate these cats, to some other area where they can be in a good spot to fend for themselves, kind of be away from wildlife and coyotes getting to them. So that was something that took us, I would say a couple of weeks. Between going out there and herding them all, and we had to get some gloves, roll up our sleeves, drive them down, and the cats weren't too happy once we actually found them and grabbed them, but that's just part of the process. So it literally was herding cats when we were out there. Yeah, luckily we've dealt with that. But when you're going to real estate school learning about investing, they don't tell you about any of these little problems where you're going to have to get your hands dirty and get out there and solve the problem. That was one of the things that we did out there. Another situation that came up on our Canyon Lake property. This was over the summer. I want to say it was around July, August timeframe. We were doing a lot of construction on the property at the time, and we had contractors out there that were working, but they were working at a medium pace, and they were doing upgrades and renovations. But we really just this was before we brought on our on-site guy to be there all the time. We really just needed somebody that we could call that could help out with HVAC, maintenance, little repairs, maybe a little bit of plumbing or electrical work, just a general handyman that could do a little bit of everything. And we didn't need them all the time, maybe 10, 20 hours a week, just kind of when guests would have a little maintenance request that they could come out there and fix it, or when it's something we didn't want to distract the construction crew from, but we did need the work taken care of. So we would have we put out a post in Canyon Lake on their basically Facebook Marketplace or group where they're saying, "Hey, we're out there, and we're looking for people that can come out and be handymen." And we probably got like 20 people that had applied for us. We called them all, looked at their references, kind of checked their track record and said, okay, yeah, these guys seem like they're legit. And then we interviewed them and we just asked them enough questions to figure out what their experience was, what they worked on, what they're comfortable with. Kind of like anyone else, they're like, hey, let's start them off, see what they're comfortable, what they can handle. And then if they're good at their jobs, we'll keep them on, we'll keep giving them more work. But obviously within the first week or two, if they're not good at their job, we're just going to let them go. So there was a guy that came and he was only looking for $25 an hour, and that's typically what we had paid a lot of these other, maintenance and renovation guys when they're kind of local to the area and it's more low skill labor that they're out there doing. These bigger companies might charge you $50 to $65 an hour if they are professional, branded, they've got a lot of overhead. But if you're just needing a body on site, just doing some basic tasks, 25 an hour is kind of where we've seen the price be. And that's where this guy lined up, and he was local to Canyon Lake. He was, 8-minute drive from the property. He could pop over there anytime, and was just kind of looking for some work over the summer. He got laid off from his previous job a couple months before, and it wasn't going to be his whole career, but he just wanted something to do in the meantime. So we brought him on, and he ended up working for us for a couple of weeks, and he did decent work. For 25 an hour, you kind of get what you get. And but he would come over as needed. We'd call him. He'd pop in, and he was doing the repairs and doing the upgrades here and there. So it wasn't a ton, but 10, 20 hours a week. Well, after about 3 weeks of him being on site and doing these repairs, my partner Leighton had noticed some of the tools had just gone missing, and a bunch of like chainsaws, hammers, a couple appliances, toolboxes, probably about $1,500 worth of stuff had gone missing. And this is a big construction site. There's 4 cabins out there, and we've got a bunch of storage, so it's easy for things to potentially go in a spot that they're not supposed to and just be misplaced for a little bit if you're not keeping good track of it. And so that's kind of what had happened after a couple of days. We noticed, hey, where are these things? We check every storage, we check every cabin, making sure a guest hasn't somehow stumbled upon it or moved. We rounded up the whole crew. I think we had like 12 guys on site working and said, hey, anybody moved this or whatever? Well, we couldn't find it. Looks like it had got stolen. We were calling that new guy out in Canyon Lake to say, hey, have you heard anything? He wasn't responding. He wasn't answering his messages or anything. It was pretty obvious to us at that point that, hey, he was the one that had done it. Even one of the other guys said that they saw his truck over at our site when he wasn't necessarily supposed to be on site, just kind of back behind one of the cabins, presumably gathering all this stuff. Well, we launch out and we're looking at Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, and a couple of those places just to see if we see anything. And, sure enough, like one day later, we see a bunch of posts with all of our tools from the same dude on his Facebook profile. And he had taken the photos of the tools in our cabins. We recognized our back porches, we recognized our countertops and our cabinets combination. So this guy apparently was dumb enough to, steal from us, post it on Facebook Marketplace right away with photos that he took while it was on our property. It's the easiest thing to prove that this was our stuff that was stolen. And so we immediately alerted the cops to say, hey, here's what's going on. We had called this guy. Here's all of his information. You guys go out there and handle it. And we told all our construction crews, hey, if you guys see this or doing it, know what's going on. Like, this guy definitely stole our stuff. If you ever see him around, like, let us know, let the cops know, and they'll help take care of it. Well, this guy was just dumb enough that even though we had called the cops, they weren't able to find him for a little bit, and they were going to start tracking him down. And so then the next day, he does the dumbest thing, still not answering his phone from us, obviously, but he comes back to the property with his truck and parks behind a different cabin and gets out of the truck. And before he gets too far, there were a bunch of our construction workers that were still there. I mean, this was in the evening. It was at night. It was probably about 8:30 at night. But he assumed that nobody was over there working anymore. And the other people that were the construction workers, they stayed there in one of the cabins that was not renovated yet. And so they were doing the renovations during the day. And then at night, they would just sit on the front porch and they saw this guy's truck coming up and, parking behind the property. And they kind of, they called our partner Leighton, they called me, and they called the cops and they said, hey, this guy's right here. You guys need to get over here right now. And there's 8 of them, just ran over there, jumped on the guy, held him down, and, needless to say, beat him up a little bit because they were really protective of our site and our property, and they didn't want a bad reputation from, us as the owners giving them good work. And so they really helped, get that guy held down, and they took his keys and they just threw him so he couldn't get out here. And then, probably 15, 20 minutes later, the cops ended up coming back to the property. This is about 9:30 at night. Our partner Leighton gets over there as well just to be on site. And this guy had, a bloody nose and just kind of had, all over the place. Looked like he didn't have a good end of that fight when everybody else was beating up on him. The cops took him away and, put him in handcuffs, but then they had to put him in a stretcher as well and take him, I assume to the hospital. But, he went to jail and he was in there, I mean, at least a couple of months before he was let out. Wish it would have been longer, but we were able to recover probably about, $900 worth of our materials and tools. Like, we didn't get the whole 1,500, unfortunately, but that guy definitely learned his lesson, hasn't been back since, really understands that there are a lot of consequences to what's going on here. But, these are little things you don't really expect going in to do a project like this. I mean, obviously you want security, you don't want things stolen from you, and you got to be as careful as you can, but these things do happen throughout the property. I'll say it even affected me personally. I was on site at one of our properties in Gonzales, and this was after we had owned that apartment complex for about a year. Gonzales is an okay town, but just with everywhere especially when you're working in C-class apartment complexes, there tends to be just a little bit more crime in some of these smaller towns where you're working with probably the cheapest rents in town. And so I had parked my truck out there, and I'd been walking around the property for a few hours. We walk around to look at some of the units, talk to the staff that's over there, make any recommendations that were out there. Well, the bed in my truck I had left unlocked, and I keep my toolbox in there just all the time. You never know when you're going to need it when you're on site for these things. So I didn't carry it with me, but it was in the bed of my truck. And just while I was out there, 4 o'clock during the day, somebody had gone in, like, checked that my trunk bed was unlocked, opened it, got my toolbox out of there. There were other tools in there too, but they only grabbed the toolbox, took off, closed it back up. I didn't notice till I was home that night, and I was getting some other stuff out of the bed. And I said, where is my toolbox? I'm missing this thing. And called my partner. Did I leave it at the property? Did I leave it anywhere? And nope. So, and we didn't have cameras installed on the property at that point. And so, just we didn't know who it was, but somebody ended up taking my personal toolbox. I probably had, $500-600 worth of tools in there. So I had to go over to Home Depot, later that month and just replace all my own personal tools from when I'm in there next time. So I've had that personally affect me. And now the truck that I've got automatically locks every time. And, I just you keep a little bit more of my wits about me when I go to some of these properties. So let's see what else we've had. Okay. So our Canyon Lake property, when we first bought that one, we were out there and ours is on 5 acres and there's a couple of properties nearby us. We're on this road, FM 306. It kind of curves in a circle all the way around Canyon Lake. And then there's these little offshoots that come from it with little roads that have other restaurants or marinas or docks or things like that. The main one is this circle 306 that goes all the way around. So our property is on one of these little offshoot roads. Well, the offshoot road just northwest of us goes a little bit further, and it's these guys that they probably own about 200 acres of property in Canyon Lake. So there's nothing out there. They've got their one house. It's a big 5-bedroom house out there, and I think they've got another barn. But it's dark, and our property is called Starlight Horizon because it's situated in Canyon Lake. And when it gets dark out there, you can see the starlight, you can see the constellations very visibly. We're a dark skies community, so we don't even give off a whole lot of natural light intentionally. We've tried to keep it dark so that you can maximize the benefit of seeing the starlight going on in the area. And so when we had gone in there and we took it over, originally it was long-term rental units for people living in each of these 14 cabins. And they were paying rent to us, and we were doing construction on the property, and we had let them know that, hey, we're the new owners, we're doing some renovations, and here's what we're doing, so we're not going to be renewing your lease. Well, the neighbors had found out about it. These guys had owned 200 acres out there in Canyon Lake, and you can look up on public record who the owner of the property is, and it comes up with RLLC. And if you do enough digging, you can find. And so these guys had been in real estate long enough to find my contact information and reached out and said, "Hey, are you the new owner of this property over here?" And we said, "Well, yeah, well, we are. What's going on?" And they said, they also live here in Austin, but that's their getaway ranch out there in Canyon Lake. And they wanted to know if we'd be interested in doing a meeting. And I'm a very neighborly guy. I want to get to know everybody that I'm working with, that we're living in an area with, and let's get to know everybody, because you never know when there's going to be ways that you can help each other out, or the information that you can gain from being friendly to your neighbors, or you just never know when you might be able to need a favor from somebody, and they're the perfect person to help you out with that. So we ended up meeting at a coffee shop here in Austin. Super friendly father-son team. They've been, father had been in real estate for like 35 years or something like that. He'd been training his son. He'd already been in real estate, at least 10 years, from when he was probably 16. And so they were telling us they wanted to protect the dark skies community that they had out there, because they said, if we're coming out and we're going to demolish the whole thing and build, there's no building or zoning codes out there in Canyon Lake, so we could really build whatever we want, like a big hotel or a high rise or something. And so they just wanted to see if we come out there and we put all this light, it's going to mess up the whole community for them and for all of our other neighbors. And they just wanted to say, technically it's within our rights to do whatever we want since there were no zoning codes, but they just really wanted their voice heard about not disrupting the local community. And we said, "Hey, we're at the same place. We're right there with you. We want to preserve what's so special about this, being able to see the stars and the constellations, be out here in nature, and not make it feel like a little Austin." And so we assured them that, hey, we're not doing that. And since that, we've been on good terms with the neighbors, where they help us out and tell us, "Hey, here's what is it, PECU, and a couple other governing bodies that can help get you either some grants or things that can help move the property along a little bit, or if you have any trouble with the county, here are some people that you can come to." So they've been very helpful just in doing that. But you want to make sure you start things off on the right foot. We had a property that we had recently purchased, and this was probably a month into us taking over. This was a multifamily apartment complex kind of close to Austin here. And we had bought it, and we had kind of same deal. We had construction crews over there working, and they were installing, pergolas, fixing up the pool, building some gates. And, middle of the day, about, 12 o'clock, I was actually at the property that day at 10:30 in the morning. And we just walked around the property, and then I had left about 11. And at 12 noon, right around then, apparently a car was driving down the road, somehow lost control and ended up hitting into one of our buildings on the side. And they completely trashed the HVAC unit that was there and came into it. It was like a brick wall with some siding. So they just damaged the brick, damaged the siding. Luckily, it didn't go all the way into enough to damage the inside of the unit. Everything was more or less contained on the exterior, like just damaging how it looked on the outside visually, without any structural damage to the inside. But it's not cheap to fix some of those things, and so the local manager that was on site called the cops right away. The cops showed up and did a police report about the property, but it turns out before the cops were able to get there, they actually had like whoever drove into the property ended up fleeing the scene. So they didn't have any details on who it was, what their car was, anything other than the on-site person that was there that saw it happen but didn't record their license plate or any details. So unfortunately, that person just got away. And with our property, this is why you typically have insurance. And if you have a house, you'll have, one, two, $3,000 deductible. And for something like this, you do want to file, even if you meet your deductible, you'll have the insurance there for the rest of the year that can go and cover any further losses from that. Well, on buildings that are this big and this expensive, an insurance loss really has these deductibles are 20 to $25,000. So this person they probably did about $8,000 of damage, but without knowing who it was, really had no way of tracking them down or doing it. And we filed for our insurance that would raise our insurance rates and it wouldn't even get close to our deductible. And so that's just a cost that we have to end up eating. And I guess the lesson from that is, getting security cameras installed as soon as you can so that you can have visuals on who's coming in and out of the property. And then just instructing the on-site people that if you see anything like that, getting photographs of license plate information, photos of the people, because people do tend to just leave the scene of the crime, when they damage $70,000 of exterior damage on our property over there. For what it's worth, we were going to replace that HVAC unit anyways, and there were other repairs we're doing kind of similar to what we did on the exterior, so it was not an additional cost. Like we had already built some of this construction into our repair budget, but you want things to go a certain way, and having a car wreck into your property is never fun. Another story that happened. This was at our Story Lane property up in Dallas. It's a 12-unit property up there that we've got, and the way that the parking lot is laid out over there was really weird. You have this one long line, a bunch of horizontal parking spots along. If you're driving in, you basically enter the gate, and then on the right side, you've got maybe 8 of these parking spots that are just one car horizontal, but they're pretty tight, so it's kind of hard to come in and turn right. And then they've got a couple of these double parking spots. So if you come in, you can immediately turn left. There's about 8 of these double parking spots. And then they had a fence, and then they had the trash, and then they had a curb coming this way so you could come in and around and kind of pull this weird maneuver where you had to do a long turn, or you could come and do a long turn. So it's like they put the trash in the middle of the property and they built curbs around it, and they would make you have to turn one way or another to get to your parking spot. And so it decreased the size of the parking lot quite a bit, so that I think we had, I want to say 18 parking spots in the property when it was fully filled up. And it also had the trash can in there, but it had these curbs and this like ugly looking fence in there. So we went in and we said, we're replacing the fence anyways. Let's go in and remove these curbs in their weird spots and go in there and just kind of flatten it all out so it just looks like a normal flat parking lot. We're going to put some nice natural designs on the edges of the property so that the landscaping looks good. But then let's redraw the parking lot lines so that it has a good flow to it where it's coming. It just opens it up a little bit more, and it's going to create 22 spaces, and there's not going to be curbs in the middle of it. So that's what we told the contractors to say, hey, here's what we're looking to do. They gave us bids. There's a different guy that removes the curbs and flattens it out with new concrete. And then we had another guy come in and redraw all the lines. Well, when they redraw the lines, they say, hey, we have to do this up to code. So they said, you have to include 2 of these handicap pieces, and you have to include fire lanes, and then you had to include some other of this diagonal, white line. So here's the things you have to have. Here's what we recommend. Where do you want? So we go through that conversation. Now I've just learned that you got to get all this stuff in writing, and you got to have maps drawn out, and like it's so easy for contractors to have a conversation and then either they have an opinion about how they think it should be done, or let's say they know the right way that it should be done and you even had the conversation, but they're going to do the easy cheap way for them. And if you can't prove whatever it is that you had requested up front, it's going to be hard to go to any court of law or anybody to prove that, hey, this is how we wanted it. And so when the contractor went in there and drew the lines, he had the fire zone, and he ended up taking up 4 extra parking spots. We were supposed to get 22 parking spots in this community. He ended up only getting 18. We, like, did all this renovation, and he made the fire lane, like, gigantic, like, unnecessarily gigantic. And so we went in and we said, "Hey, here was our drawing, here are the measurements. You, like, doubled the size of this fire lane unnecessarily. We want these 4 parking spots added back in." And then, we had shown him, like, we have the map that we drew out from the survey. We have the measurements. You had all of this, and you just didn't do it. So luckily, because we had that data, we were able to send that over to them. They looked at it, they agreed, they apologized, tried to make an excuse for why they did it that way, and we're like, "Hey, look, there's no excuse. This is how it's supposed to be." So they did go in and fix it, on their own dime, which was the right thing to do. And then the parking lot did get fixed. But it's just one of those lessons I learned over and over is you've got to write this stuff down and you've got to make it as detailed and explicit as you can, at least when you're working with new people. If you have someone that you trust and you guys have done this before a couple of times, you can kind of develop a system and go a little bit quicker because speed isn't important in some of these. But if you're working with somebody new, you're developing those lines of communications, everything's got to be in writing. Which brings me to my next point on a Dallas property. I really like the way that a good sign looks on a property. And so we had bought it and it was called Lost on Story Lane, which it's not a bad name, but it just sounds so bland. So I renamed it Legends on Story Lane, as the name brand of the community, and so we have that name on our website, we have it on our sign out front, and then we put a big monument sign on the side of the building. So I call these sign companies and I say, "I've gone into Photoshop and I've designed, here's the logo, here's the name, here's what I want it to look like, here's the font, here's the size, everything about it that you can think of." And I've even taken a photo of the front of the building and overlaid my image of what I want the logo to look like right there with the size dimensions. And they send back to me their mock-up version, which is kind of a similar thing, but they just do it with their software and their materials, and they've got the dimensions and the sign and how many inches and everything. So it's all like these sign companies are good about putting things in writing as well, or at least they should be. The good ones are. So this person had sent it back. They had the same drawing and all those dimensions, and so we looked them over. It looks good, and they want a deposit. They wanted, like 40% of the total upfront so that they could fabricate and create the sign, and then once it's ready, they would call us, schedule a date to have it installed. We'll go out there, install it, kind of approve everything. Well, anyways, so about 2 months goes by, they're working on it. I was checking in on them every couple of weeks, make sure we're still in progress. So we get to what time was this? This was probably about May, I would say April, May this year. So I'm calling and checking, and they said, "Yeah, we should be able to get it done in about 2 weeks." And so 2 weeks goes by, and I said, "Hey, hadn't heard from you guys. Is the sign finished? Are we ready to install it?" Oh, no, actually, I didn't even reach out to them. I think they had just sent me an email with, like, a final invoice. That was what it was. And I remember emailing them back saying, "Hey, I got your final invoice for, like, the total sign in total was, like, $7,500." So it was the remaining, $3,000-$4,000 balance that I owed them. So I said, "Well, before I pay this, I wanna get an approval, like, let me see what the sign looks like. I wanna go out and check it." And they said, "Oh, yeah, like, it's up there, it's ready." And I was like, "What do you mean it's up there?" And they said, like, "We were out at your property yesterday, and we installed it." And mind you, we had just built a fence around this property, so and you have to have a gate code to get in, and, they didn't have I don't know, somehow the gate must have been they got themselves open, but this sign is placed between the 2nd and 3rd story of this building, so it's up there. So they had to have some heavy machinery to lift this sign, and this is a probably 250-pound sign that they put up there on the side of the building. It was no easy feat for them to get this sign up there, and somehow they did it, without the gate code and just installed it all one day and then sent me the bill. They didn't ask when they could install it. They didn't get my approval for how it looked when it was done. They just said, "Okay, here you go." And I said, "Okay, well, that's interesting." And then So I called our on-site guy and I said, "Hey, can you go take some photos of this? Like, is it really there?" And so he sent me the photos and he's like, "Yeah, here it is." And I looked at it, I stared, and I was like, "It's cool. Like, it looks like the mock-up that we had," but I was like, "It looks like not right. It looks so small." Granted, I'm not there, right? And things look different in person than they do in a photo, but I couldn't wrap my head. I was like, "Something about it just doesn't seem right," like, and it was up between the 2nd and 3rd stories. It was really hard, like, to get up there and measure it. And, we this would have been, like, what, a couple months at this point, so I had to go dig back and say, "Okay, where was this drawing? What were the measurements?" And I even had that Photoshop file that I had overlaid the building with the sign on it, and I remember I could count. It was a high enough resolution that I could count. There are 2 bricks to the left of the sign before you get to the edge of the building, and on the right side, there are about 2 bricks before you got to the edge of the building, and then I looked at the photo of the actual sign that they installed. There's about 4.5 bricks on each side, and I said, "Okay, this is definitely different. Y'all gotta go out there and measure our on-site guy." I was like, "You have to get up there and measure the actual width." So they get out there and they measure the actual width, and I call the sign company and I say, "Hey, what are the dimensions of this sign?" And they end up sending it to me, and they said they had gotten it to, like, 72 inches. And I said, "Well, here's our original agreement that said it was supposed to be 90 inches." And they said, "Well, these are kinda like rough estimates." And I'm like, "It looks way different. It's like 20% smaller. That's why we have these dimensions. It has to be exact like this." And they ended up saying that, "Hey, they can redo it, but I have to pay a redesign fee of, like, an additional $2,000 upfront as a deposit. Then they're gonna come and get the sign, and then they're gonna do all this." And I said, this isn't our error. We had the dimensions correctly done. You guys didn't get our approval before you went on site and installed this thing. Like, this is not how it should have been handled. You guys should have gotten approval. We should have okayed the final fabrication before it was installed and then, scheduled the installation with us." So I called our on-site guy and I called our manager and I said, "You know what's gonna happen? These guys are gonna come, they're gonna wanna take their sign and then keep our deposit ransom and say that, 'Hey, we have to pay them more money for them to do the correct sign.'" So I said, "Make sure we change the gate code so they can't just come in and, like, kinda keep an eye the next 2 weeks. And if you see these guys with this truck try to take our sign, like, call the cops." 'Cause I had emailed them and I said, "You guys are not allowed, to come and get the sign until we figure this out. You shouldn't have installed it in the first place." Well, anyways, they did, like, 3 days later, come try to take the sign away. Luckily, our on-site guy was there, and he called the cops and said, "Hey, you guys can't be here doing this. This is our private property here. Like, we gotta work this out professionally before we'll let you guys take the sign back." And so, I mean, since then, that was the last that we heard of them, unfortunately. At the end of the day, I would have preferred to have a sign that was the correct size and length. This one is a little small, it looks a little worse, but because we were able to move forward on it, essentially at a discounted price because they were just messing with us, and they didn't end up honoring their side of the contract, and they just called it off halfway through, but they had already installed it. It was difficult to do, but again, it's one of those things where you have to get all this stuff in writing, and you have to have it explained over in as much detail as you can so that when there are these little errors that come up and it can be a better solution than he said, she said, who's in charge here? It has to be, well, what were the documents that were said? What was agreed upon? And the difficult part about all of this is until you've had some of these problems, it's hard to know where the potential problems could come up. So you could almost over document everything, and in some ways, you should almost over document everything, or ask as many questions as you can, or really, have them. But that was something that happened on our property up there in Story Lane up in Dallas. I've got another story from our Canyon Lake property, Starlight Horizon. So we had owned the property, and as I had mentioned earlier, we took it over and it was fully occupied, 14 cabins, and people were living in them. They're 3-bedroom, 2-bath cabins, so you had either couples or families, and these people were not the kindest to the property. They nice enough to us, but some of them were hoarders. They just had a bunch of junk sitting all over the place. So we had gone in and started renovating 2 or 3 of them already, and we were upgrading them. And it was interesting because when you start upgrading units, everybody in the community talks, and they say there's new management, there's new ownership that came in. They all wanna peek inside and say, "Well, how does it look now? Like, what's the inside of the property like?" And so they're coming around to our construction crews asking for a peek, and they look really good, and they said, My lease isn't up for another 7, 8 months, but do you guys wanna come and install, like, those brand new floors and kitchen countertop, all stuff in my unit?" And we have to delicately say, we're we are upgrading units, but normally if it's a multifamily, we would say, "Hey, do you wanna move into this? Here the new rent is higher, 300, $400 to get this premium unit, or you can renew where you currently are at your discounted rate." But for this one, it's not a multifamily. We were turning it into a short-term rental community, so we were just telling people politely, "Hey, we're renovating these, and this is what we're doing. We're turning it into a boutique hotel, and so, you guys will have to find housing elsewhere, but we're giving you 3, 4 months heads up. You should have plenty of time to find a good spot, relocate. We'll write you guys wonderful letters of recommendation. Anything you need to kind of help make the process easier for you, we're kind of here to help you out with that. But we are letting you know now." Well, there was this one couple on there that was not very happy with us. And so they stopped paying their rent. Granted, I don't, they might have had trouble paying the rent in general, like financially. It wasn't like us coming in and renovating the property and not renewing their lease didn't make them happy. But I think they had difficulty paying their rent on time before anyways, even before that. And so when we were over there, they would give us mean looks, they would cuss us out, they would flip us off, and they were the ones that had the longest lease there. I wanna say their lease was up at the end of May, and this was January, February that we were over there still, doing these upgrades, giving people notice of, "Hey, here's when your lease is gonna be up." So, well, what would happen is we're on a septic system out there, and so we have to have about once a quarter someone inspect the septic system and go through and maybe pump it or do any repairs that are needed or just kinda check that it's working. Well, probably about, but it shouldn't need a whole lot, just because it's on a septic, like, you install it once and it's about 10 years. These things do last for a while, and they're easy to handle if you have them set up right the first time, and this one was set up well. And so we would come out there and get a complaint, that, "Hey, the alarm's going off," or "There's a clog," or "There's a leak," or, like, "It was completely dry." These things are supposed to be, like, reciprocating or, like, keeping themselves, they're supposed to have activity going through them and pumping the sewage out, and they're supposed to have a grinder and a pump. Well, if the grinder and the pump are turned off, it ends up backing up quite a bit, and then the alarms go off, and you gotta go out there and check and see what's going on. Well, we would go out there, and it turns out what the problem was, some of the times we got there, like, every 2 weeks, and there would be, like, this one pump that had been turned off, and it wasn't on our main electrical panel breaker, it was like, a far away where the septic pump electrical panel breaker was, which was really hidden from the property. Like, if you're living in a house or living in one of the cabins, you would not have confused it for years. It was out of the way. Even then, it's like it's hard to find. It was located kind of behind some trees and, next to the system. So somebody had to intentionally go over, we found out, go over there and, like, turn it off. And at first we were just thinking it was, like, short circuiting somewhere, but after it happened, like, 4 times, this same similar problem, but then also slightly different problems, um, we were like, "Man, somebody's, like, tripping this." And so we again, we got some cameras on the property to see who's causing it, and, it turns out that one lady that really didn't like us, that wasn't even paying her rent, her husband actually worked for a septic repair company, and so they knew all the insights on how these systems work and how you could intentionally sabotage and mess them up. And so they were sabotaging us and tripping these septic breakers so that they would back up, cause problems. We'd have to call somebody. It'd cost us about $700, $800 for them to come out and do the repair and do the fix. And then, and they would call the county on us and say, "Hey, there's septic backing up outside. It smells really bad." And then they would get the county involved and really upset with us. And so the county was saying, "We're having these problems. What's going on?" And we'd have to tell them, like, "Hey, this property's 12 years old at this point. We bought the property. It didn't have these problems beforehand. We kept the same repair company on that was doing these repairs, and, like, all of a sudden these repairs are needed, so it's as much a surprise to us what's going on." But then, and they couldn't disclose, like, "How'd you guys even know as the county? Were you guys driving by and smelled it?" Like, "No, you guys got a complaint from somebody, right? We bet it's this person, and we bet that they're the one that's causing it because they're just not happy that we're going in and we're doing these constructions and renovations." So, again, no way to really protect from that or know going in. I mean, the best that you can do is just provide good customer service to that people, but and that lady did end up getting evicted eventually because she got 3 months behind on her rent. We filed the eviction after they're 1 month behind on rent, but it took another 2 months before she was finally evicted. But, just all of these little problems that come up, when you're dealing with these things. And so I can't think of any way that we could have handled that better, other than just getting the security cameras up there in more places so we can kind of keep an eye on what's going on with the property in all areas. But if people are intentionally sabotaging us, even if you know who it is, there's only so much you can really do. And so with all these projects, it's a good idea to be a little extra capitalized on some of your construction and some of your reserve budget because there are just problems that will come up no matter what. Let's see what else we've got as far as stories. I've got time for one more story. We had this happen on a property of ours recently. So we took over uh, the ownership and management on this property that we bought. This was a multifamily apartment complex. And so it came with an on-site leasing and maintenance staff, and they had been running this property for about 5 years at this point. They were decently good at it, and but kinda like anything, if we're our job is to buy properties that need repairs, that need renovations, that need improvements in some way or another, and so we'll definitely work with the on-site team because they have knowledge of who the good residents are, where the problems are, and if they've got the right attitude and they say, "Hey, we're here to make this property the best that it can be. We just need a little bit of money to help get us there," and that's what the previous ownership wasn't able to provide. Well, money can help solve a lot of problems if you've got the right attitude and the right staff. So we came in and we said, "All right, well, hey, we're gonna do some of these repairs and some of these upgrades." Well, and come to find out, a lot of the difficulty wasn't because there wasn't money, it was because the on-site staff just wasn't doing the quality of work that we typically expect in a professionally run, multifamily property. And the way that they were doing leasing, everything was handwritten leases. People were paying their rent in cash or money order checks, which can be easily lost or manipulated or difficult for, and some tenants prefer to come in and do that, pay that in cash, but it's just easier if you have a digital trail of everything. If people pay their rent online through ACH, you probably get a better clientele of people paying rent, but then you also get a digital trail of where rent comes from. Well, and as far as their rent roll of who was living in what unit, they just had, a piece of paper on their desk for who was where. They would scratch someone out when they moved out, and we'd write the new person when they moved in. So that is a very difficult way to track, a big multifamily property with lots of people paying rents, and they would have things like in their head, they knew that that person paid 900 a month, but then on their lease, it said 650, and on the document, it said 850, and so it took us a little bit to get all of that properly updated to say, "Okay, what's the amount that they guys are actually agreed to pay rent on? Where is it documented? And let's make sure we all have this in the right place." So we put it all digital. We were teaching them how to use Excel and some of these, management software that we've got that handle the leasing digitally, that handle the rent roll, that handle the general ledger and the budget and, all these things like a professional current property management company should. The difficulty was, this on-site team had been doing it their way for so long, and they just weren't really computer literate. They didn't really need to be at that point. Couple that with the amount that the previous ownership was paying them was more than we had budgeted for that type of property. If you get someone that's a little younger, that is computer literate, you can typically get, a good, uh, you know, on-site team for about 25 to $35 an hour for either leasing and maintenance. And this is a smaller property, so it only really needed about 20 hours a week from leasing, 20 hours a week from maintenance. So if you come in and you get those, I mean, that I think we had that budgeted probably around 65, $70,000 for, on-site payroll for the year. And these people, the previous on-site team was getting about 75,000, so they're over our budget, and we could have somebody that would have been much more effective and computer literate for about 65,000. So after about a month and a half of working with them, we ended up telling them that, hey, we're going to have to go with someone on site that's a little bit more experienced, and it's going to be within our budget and has the ability to, work quickly in the system and do the quality of work that we're looking for. And so we gave, 2 weeks heads up. We said, "Hey, we'll give you a little severance to kinda make sure you're taken care of on your way." They found another person to be our combination leasing and on-site maintenance at the same time, came in, and they were very effective. They actually noticed a lot of the quality of workmanship wasn't up to our standards, so they were doing repairs as they should before. Well, when residents would ask, there were a lot of back orders that said, "Hey, our stoves still aren't working. We've got a leak in our bathtub the upstairs bathtub is leaking into our unit," and they hadn't repaired it for 6 months. So he was getting caught back up on all those things. So there's a lot of catch up that you got to do up front, but eventually you get everything caught back up, and then you're just kind of going. So he was working through that process. Well, about 6 weeks into him working with us on this new property, he was doing well, learning all the systems. Uh, you know, it's hard to really know what the full story is, but the story that he told us was that he had a family emergency and he had to leave, move out of Texas to another state to go be with his family and take care of them long term. And he had to leave his job and he had to leave immediately. And he couldn't give any notice. And he's really sorry, but bye. And so then here we are stuck with this person who's been working on the property 6 weeks, getting to know the residents. The residents get to know him, and then he's just gone. And now we have nobody working there. We had to get the regional that supervises, about 11 properties in the area to come in and handle the on-site phone calls and handle the on-site maintenance requests. And that's a lot to do to fill in, even if it's temporarily, just to get someone in there on a more permanent basis. And so the regional was stepping in. They were doing all this work, but it left us with a bit of a hole. So we put someone temporarily in there. They're doing the leasing, they're doing the maintenance, and we're training a new staff to get in there. But it's one of those things that it's just kind of hard to predict when you always expect things to go well or things to go easy, or it's just like, hey, hire the property manager or hire a landscaper or do whatever you need to do. But it's a very different world when you get in there and you're actually doing the management day to day, because there's a lot of these problems that come up. And if you're not paying attention or thinking that it's easy, these costs can really pile up. But kind of like everything else, be proactive, stay networked, ask for help, ask for mentorship referrals, and find out ways that you can, roll up your sleeves and handle problems as they come. I think the people that do really well in real estate will take on any challenge and just keep working at it until it's fixed, and just go into a project knowing that there are going to be unexpected surprises. So buffering the CapEx budget a little bit, buffering your reserves, working with good teammates and good partners who have the flexibility in their time and intelligence to step in and handle problems that are unexpected is really the best way to go. So if you do those things, you'll be successful in real estate investing. But as a lot of my partners say, this can be a tough job, but it's definitely not boring. So, all right. So this is the war room for today. If you guys liked this episode, if you guys want to ever be on as a guest or have topics that you want us to talk about, send me a direct message and we can get you on the show and discuss some of those topics. Feel free to leave me a comment here and share this on your personal pages if you guys found this helpful as well. Thanks so much. I'll see you next week.